Hello there, folks, and welcome to our first video in this Gaming Through Sporting History video series, where we're looking at the domestic leagues of Championship Manager 2010 and how they've looked to represent the last 15 years of footballing history. We're going to be looking at the sort of big five leagues of Europe as just a sort of petri dish for, how Championship Manager 2010 has done um, in terms of representing, footballing history for the period. And we're starting off in Spain with La Liga. Now, looking at the league itself, obviously IRL, we're talking about the dominance of Barcelona and Real Madrid. So there's been 15 titles up for grabs. Barcelona have won over half of those with 8 titles, Real Madrid 5. But Atletico Madrid have emerged as that established third team in Spain, if you like, with 2 domestic titles as well as a significant presence in, the Champions League and, European competition in general. So that's been, yeah, I mean, that's been very much reflected in how the game has represented it, to be perfectly honest. It's a pretty accurate representation, one might say. Barcelona have been the dominant force. They've picked up 64% of the Liga titles across the 3 playthroughs we've used as our kind of sample. So 45 titles, sorry, up for grabs. And they picked up 29 of those. Real Madrid coming in second, only picked up 11, so quite a significant drop off. Barcelona showing real dominance there. Combined, they've picked up 89% of all titles, which is pretty accurate to reality. So, certainly there is sort of an ingrained dominance that Championship Manager 2010 has kind of picked up on and reflected in its gameplay. Um, I mean, ultimately coming into the 2010s, both sides have tremendous squads and tremendous squad depth. So you've got that quality of first team and sort of squad that persists in the early through to mid game. But it is striking that none of those big Spanish teams emerged in any of the playthroughs to genuinely challenge the dominance of those two teams. Only Sevilla win more than one title. Atletico Madrid, Celta Vigo, and Espanyol managed to pick up a La Liga title. But yeah, absolute dominance of the big two in Spain. Another interesting thing of this period, goat on goat. Yeah, Messi versus Ronaldo. So this is the 2010, the first season in Spain for Ronaldo after his signing from Manchester United, beginning the legendary rivalry between Messi and Ronaldo. Now, for me, I always sort of favoured Ronaldo. I kind of thought that he'd challenged himself by playing in Premier League. He obviously then moved on to other high-profile leagues across Europe with Juventus and then returning to Manchester United. But what I looked to do in this was to create more of a quantifiable approach to analysing the performance of these two players against each other and with sort of metrics that I could get out of the game as well to kind of compare their real world with their sort of digital representations. And in doing so, kind of got the impression that Messi's numbers were actually significantly better than Ronaldo's in the whole. So even though I might have favoured Ronaldo before doing this, my approach through this little project has kind of pushed me towards Messi, and that is to a certain extent to do with how things have panned out for Ronaldo since leaving Real Madrid. Certainly at Juventus, Manchester United, now at Al Nassr. Um, it wasn't as a successful a kind of latter stage of career, I think, to what we're seeing with Messi, where he persists at Barcelona, has another successful period at Paris Saint-Germain, and then obviously has his sort of retirement party over in Miami. So, yeah, interesting trajectories for those two players. But for me, the more quantifiable approach actually pitched me towards Messi as the winner in this particular debate. But let's see what we're looking at. So, IRL, we're looking at this sort of 15-year period, and the numbers are quite interesting in terms of how they shake out. In terms of league goals, pretty similar both in the 462, 460 international career. Now this is entire career, not just the 15 years we're looking at. We're talking about around about 200 international caps, and obviously a ton of goals. Both players over 100 international goals. Um, Interesting how league titles shake out over this period. Ronaldo only picking up two league titles, two La Ligas um, with Real Madrid, obviously. Whereas, as I say, Messi has sort of had that sort of more consistent success domestically, at least. Seven league titles, two Ligue 1s with Paris Saint-Germain. That somewhat flipped when we factor in the Champions Leagues, 2-4 in favour of Ronaldo. And in terms of international outcomes, we've got the Copa America, we've got the European Cup, but a big kicker there for Messi is leading Argentina to that tremendous World Cup win against France. So when I looked at this again, I'm picking out goals and assists and just certain things that I could pick out from the real world numbers and also replicate in game. And I had a sort of a scoring thing whereby if their overall performances in the season are pretty similar, it would be a 1 and a 1. If it favoured one over the other, it would be a 2 and a 1. Or if it was a very significant advantage for one player over the other, it would be a 2 and a 0. Um, so in terms of that season by season performance, it actually came out quite strongly in favour of Messi there, 28 points to 9. And when you factor in the titles, sort of added points on for domestic and international continental titles, etc., it, well, in terms of ratio wise, it's closer to 2-1 rather than sort of 3-1, but it's still strongly in favour of Messi with a score of 98-50. So looking at it from a quant basis, it's actually quite strongly pitched towards Messi in terms of, which of these two tremendous players kind of takes that GOAT, the GOAT crown. So let's get into how they played out in the game. So firstly, let's just talk about their experiences. It's quite interesting to look at. So for Messi, in our first playthrough, leaves Barcelona in 2018 to join Real Madrid. Drama. 5 Liga titles at Barcelona, one at Real Madrid, retires in 2023 in the second one. Again, he has a sort of later career move, this time to Atletico Madrid, picks up an absolute ton of titles with Barcelona, and he's actually still playing with Atletico Madrid at the end of that 2023-24 season. And in the third one, again, a late career move, this time to Chelsea, wins an absolute ton of titles with Barcelona, and he's also still playing in 2024 at Chelsea. So yeah, some themes there. Stays at Barcelona, has a great deal of success at Barcelona, and has a late season move to another elite team in Europe, which is, not far off, the real process, let's say, for Messi, who moved on to PSG and into Miami, obviously, in the real world. Whereas in the game, he's still playing, at least in 2 or 3 of those campaigns, he's still playing at the elite level in Europe at the end of that 2023-24 season. Ronaldo, on the other hand, is very different across playthroughs. The first one, I think, is quite funny. He has a decent stint at Real Madrid, but then moves to Chelsea, picks up league titles and a Champions League at Real Madrid, another league title at Chelsea, but he retires in 2021 and he then re-emerges as a manager, and he's managing Spanish side Alcoyano in the Spanish lower leagues. That's a very interesting career there for Ronaldo. Things certainly tail off. He has a late career move, and then he re-emerges as a jobbing manager in Spain's lower leagues. Yeah, when players retire in Championship Manager 2010, they can re-emerge as non-playing characters, managers, scouts, that sort of thing, or they just vanish. Such a shame you can't really review a player's career once they've retired. They simply sort of vanish from the database. But in sort of RNG, fairly odd occasions, they do re-emerge. And what about Ronaldo re-emerging as a manager? Yeah, in the depths of Spanish football. Yeah, an interesting end to his career. And could that have been possible? Well, I suppose, the longevity of both of these players has been quite stark. But, if injuries or things have gone the other way, who knows? Ronaldo, in that universe at least, seems to drift quite far off the GOAT debate, really, if he's sort of retired and is in yeah, and hasn't maintained a sort of iconic status, I suppose it happens. I mean, we're looking at like great players like Wayne Rooney currently having a go at management and struggling to establish themselves down the leagues. But yeah, I think for a player that we sort of associate with such glitz and glamour as Ronaldo, it would be quite a stark alternate reality to have him managing. Um, yeah, in sort of the Spanish Tercera División. Um, but anyway, looking at number two, so again we have a sort of a late career move, this time to Barcelona. Limited opportunities and retires in 2022. So he wins titles and he kind of piggybacks on the massive success of that second playthrough for Barcelona, playing with Messi. But yeah, very little playing time. So scandal as Ronaldo moves from Real Madrid to Barcelona, but then a weird sense of sort of vindication perhaps from the Madrileños as they see him move to Barcelona, but then largely warm the bench. I mean, it is funny. It is funny to see how the computer manages its squads because, Ronaldo in that particular playthrough, yeah, saw his playing time just massively reduce. Hard to really see why. Some quite incongruous moves from the computer in terms of squad management and tactics, let's say. But in this case, again, he retires. So the longevity is simply not coming through for Ronaldo, like his physical attributes perhaps not modeled well, but by 2022 he's retired, and in this playthrough at least he vanishes from the game and enjoys his retirement away from football. Number three, so he moves to Manchester United, brief spell at Chelsea, retiring again in 2021, and yeah, La Liga titles, Champions League and a World Cup while at Real, wins a Premier League title with Manchester United. So, of the three, probably the more successful, and he's still retired in 2021, and yeah, has a bit of a journeyman experience after leaving Real Madrid with short stints at Manchester United and then at Chelsea. So yeah, I mean, interesting. The longevity isn't modelled there for Ronaldo. He certainly does. He continues at the elite level, but really from leaving Real Madrid, which happens quite early. We're talking about 2016, 2019. He then sees quite a steep decline in his overall output and ends up retiring. Um, I mean, doing this in 2025, Ronaldo is still playing. Um, but in these playthroughs, none of that sort of physical um, physical attributes and longevity are modelled. He's retired years ago. Um, so yeah, different trajectories. None of them. With Messi's far more accurately sort of modelling how his career progressed than Ronaldo's for sure. Um, and as you can expect, that is going to be played out in those numbers. So I think so. Here we go. We're looking at Messi and Ronaldo here with their in-game performances. I've got league goals here. I've got the average rating and the different titles. Um, yeah, I mean that longevity really makes a difference. I mean, Messi ends up with an average of 162 goals to Ronaldo's 86, so some way off. The average rating not massively different. 6.70 to 6.65. So again, both good. Um, but Messi that bit better, and obviously that longevity at the elite level, leading to Messi picking up a lot more titles. So this is how it sort of played out over those three playthroughs, and as you can imagine, then it's a strong win for Messi. So his total season score coming out at 105 to 45. So again, we're talking about 45 seasons here, but I didn't use all of the seasons data because as you can see through those career trajectories, Messi actually just played more seasons than Ronaldo. So I didn't want to give Messi just a lot of 2 zeros because Ronaldo simply wasn't there. So um, so it comes out at 105 to 45, and then when you factor in the titles, 190 to 123. Ronaldo has a better international career despite not winning as many titles. So on average, he picked up 164 caps and 74 goals to Messi's 126 and 44 goals. So yeah, Ronaldo certainly scoring more at international level. Um, But as we can see, in terms of longevity and overall success, Messi with a strong win here. So in this quant approach, giving it an A does actually reflect the numbers sort of I cobbled together. So yeah, both in the digital world and the IRL, Messi clearly claims the GOAT title. So in terms of a second theme then from La Liga, race to the top, like as we've discussed in the continental competition, over this 15-year period, 80% of Champions League and Europa League winners coming from Spain. So is there a is there a dominance of the Spanish sides in the same way that we've seen in the real world, in the European and domestic competition, and who emerges as a force at home and abroad? Because you've got a number of teams in the mix. I'm obviously looking at the La Liga titles. Atletico Madrid, the only other team to win La Liga titles over this 15-year period. So they certainly have established themselves as sort of Spain's third team, let's say. But when you look at the success that Sevilla have had in the Europa League and other teams have had in European competition, Villarreal, then there's sort of a debate as to, who might be Spain's third team and, perhaps how they sit against sort of peer teams across the continent. So what I've done here is just like average finish. So IRL, we've got Barcelona and Real Madrid obviously out in top. Atletico Madrid third, Sevilla. Their average finish 6.6. Villarreal, another European title winner for the period 7.2. I've included Valencia and I've included Athletic Bilbao because they have had some more domestic success over this period. But certainly at the start of the campaign in 2010, they have tremendous teams. The Valencia team in 2010 is amazing. You've got David Villa emerging, David Silva, Ever Banega in the centre midfield is actually a phenomenal player in the game. You got King, you got some really tremendous players. So Valencia, looking at it, you would expect them to be a team that could really challenge the top two. As we saw at the top, though, they don't win a La Liga title in any playthrough. But I wanted to follow them to just see how they shook out. Obviously, for what isn't modelled so closely in game is the sort of ownership and financial woes that have actually led to Valencia collapsing over this period, having the most dreadful run that sees them struggling against relegation quite consistently at the moment. But their average finish for the period is still 7.6, seventh between 7.8, 6.6 plays. And then Athletic Bilbao, again, a tremendous team at the start of the game. You've got some really great attacking players, Javi Martinez in centre midfield and Fernando Llorente up front. They really have some great pieces. But again, something that's not modelled in game is the policy of Athletic Bilbao to only recruit players from the Basque region, which again, I think would not be difficult to do. The game would have to simply have sort of a regional identity tag against players, but obviously with a very limited base, I mean, Athletic Bilbao have already kind of massively overachieved in the real world. Could that be in any way replicated in the digital one? And anyway, like looking at the numbers, it's not far off, right? It's not far off. Basically, Barcelona, Real Madrid, and Atletico Madrid do establish themselves at the top three in Spain. Barcelona are out front with an average position of 1.6. Real Madrid slightly off the pace at 3.1. Athletic Madrid again off their pace at 4.8. Sevilla domestically actually perform better than they do in real life, and as we've seen, they do pick up a number of titles. Sevilla slightly worse, Villarreal, sorry, slightly worse, 11.2. Valencia slightly better. I mean, again, kind of just reflecting the lack of sort of behind the scenes turmoil. Valencia do pretty well. They average 5.7, so they become sort of fourth. So that's what they outperform Sevilla there. And Athletic Bilbao, they also perform better. So again, are the off the field? These are the lack of modelling of off the field issues? Does that help Valencia and Athletic Bilbao in the digital representation? Probably yes. For Valencia, they don't have the ownership and the financial woes to worry about so much. For Athletic Bilbao, they don't have the recruitment constraints to worry about per se. So they do actually sort of perform better in the digital world than they do in the real world for reasons that you might see as evident. But then, yeah, looking at those IRL points, so Real Madrid do come out on top of Barcelona in this number based on those Champions League titles more than anything, with Sevilla, with Atletico Madrid and Sevilla and Villarreal sort of like rounding out the top five, let's say, of Spanish teams. In the game, yeah, clearly a top four. As we said at the top, there are other teams that emerge, none of them to genuinely challenge. You've got teams like Celta Vigo, teams like Espanyol that do have sort of isolated pockets of success, but in terms of consistency, it is that top four. It's Barcelona, Real Madrid, Atletico Madrid, and Sevilla. Barcelona way out in front. As we've seen already, they pick up the majority of La Liga titles as well as a lot of European titles. Real Madrid, similar, but some way off the pace with Atletico Madrid. And Sevilla sort of coming in as the number three. So I think in the digital space, we're going to say that Sevilla actually do manage to become that the third biggest team in Spain, because they do have that slightly increased success domestically, and they do have slightly more success in continental competition as well. And their average league position in the old timeline is not far off, at least. They're averaging about sixth, whereas Atletico Madrid are averaging about fifth. So, yeah, interesting that those two teams are the two that sit there as clearly fighting out for number three in the digital space as well as the real world one. Again, there are a lot of reasons for that, in terms of overall market, it makes sense, for Sevilla to dominate, coming from Andalusia, huge following, they have real potential there to be a force in Spanish football, as they sort of have been in European competition more than domestic. And obviously Atletico Madrid, that counterbalance to Real from the capital. Like I think it's fair to say that over the period in the digital and real world, these are the four teams that you might have flagged as being dominant in Spain, and very true to how it's evolved in real life. Atletico Madrid and Sevilla, they've kind of fought it out to be the third best team, but have not managed to really go a step further and really challenge the top two, even in a time when Barcelona have also had massive issues off the field. So yeah, I think pretty accurate really in terms of how the playthroughs have simulated the trajectory of Spain's elite teams. Barcelona and Real Madrid continuing their dominance, with Atletico Madrid and Sevilla having pockets of success that have led to the improvement of their reputations, but without firmly challenging those top two. So yeah, overall we give it an A in this whole race to the top thing. Looking into that European competition question then, so IRL, 80% of winners in Champions League and Europa League, and the dominance of four leagues. So again, we're looking at the top five leagues in Europe, and France, for reasons that we'll sort of explore when we look at Liga, haven't had that continental success. So IRL is on the right, Spain way out in front with a total of 17 champions across the two competitions. England solidly second, some way off, with then Germany, Italy, and obviously nothing to France. So in our playthroughs, England do come out on top. Again, we've got 45 potential champions, and they've picked up just over half of them there, with 23 champions coming from England. Spain just behind, solidly second. Germany massively underperforming, though. Only the four winners, with Italy and then France. And then it's going to be the Netherlands. So in the digital world, in Championship Manager 2010, it's actually the Dutch Eredivisie, if you like, that is one of the big five leagues, with the Bundesliga suffering. Now, again, we'll talk about that when we look at the Bundesliga in more detail. But that is a curiosity. Really didn't see that coming, but that is consistent. That is consistent across the three playthroughs that the German teams, the Bundesliga teams, simply did not perform in continental football. Only four title winners across 45 possible tournaments. And as you see there, the Dutch pick up two Champions League wins and four Europa League wins and outdo Germany quite handily to move into that top four league position. But it is pretty accurate. When we look at these elite leagues, and especially if we were to factor in the Dutch there, then close to 100% of Champions League winners come from these top five leagues. And the same is true of the Europa League, closer to 80%. So we still have these elite leagues dominating in the digital as well as in our timeline. Which again is interesting. Again, you would have thought the computer might have had a sort of slightly more even playing field, but again, whether it's the quality of squads and the quality of players, as assessed going into the game, or the longevity of the sort of financial dominance of those leagues, there's very little surprise packages there. There's no, apart from the Netherlands to a certain extent, there's no sudden infusion of Swedish Champions League winners or whatever it might be. So yeah, again, an A here for what is a pretty accurate representation of the predominance of Europe's key leagues in Europe's sort of top five leagues in European competition. So, final theme. Well, any discussion about football in the 2010s, let's say, wouldn't be anything without unfortunately bringing up our friend Freddie Adu. So here we go, Much Ado About Neymar. And this is kind of more about how the game represents not team performances, not sort of national performances, but individual performances. And Freddie Adu, unfortunately, is a bit of a poster child for this period. Because he was flagged from an incredibly young age as an elite talent, the wonder kid of wonder kids. Hard to really know why. He certainly emerged as, a quality youngster in the MLS. And I think North American football, trying to establish itself and its reputation, I suppose wanted to see Freddie Adu as sort of the poster child for the emerging talent coming from the United States. But it never happened for Freddie. Never happened for Freddie. And of course now he's famous for just being that, the wonder kid that never was, and unfortunately ultimately is very much a footballing nobody, a journeyman. Only picked up the one title, which was the MLS Cup in 2004, so before the game begins. Picks up 17 USA caps and 2 goals. But at the beginning of the game, he's at Benfica, so he's definitely at a point in his career where he is about to explode onto the world scene. He's a talented youngster. He's in the game as an FLC, a forward left centre, so he's playing as sort of an attacking winger. And his numbers are fantastic, and he has every potential to go on to be great, which is understandable given the reputation that he had coming into the game. But yeah, as we've said, IRL simply doesn't happen for him. Doesn't establish himself at Benfica, ends up stumbling around all manner of leagues, sort of minor world leagues, and never establishes himself as an elite player in any competition. At this point, Neymar's in a very similar situation. Probably didn't have the attention that Freddie Adu had, to be honest, at this point, but he's a young player. He's in the game as an FC, a forward centre, so slightly more attacking rather than wing orientated. But similarly, he's a teenager this time in the Santos youth system, so he's still in Spain. And obviously the career for Neymar in the real world is the polar opposite of Freddie Adu. Goes on to join Barcelona, becomes a legend there, a global icon, but divisive. Certainly he's kind of a Marmite player. You love him or loathe him. Very, very skillful, very, very elegant player, but also, yeah, criticized for his play acting, criticized for his attitude and sort of ego, and certainly hasn't enjoyed the best career after leaving Barcelona. Moved to PSG, didn't he? Where obviously performed well, but the expectations for that team were through the roof and didn't quite deliver. And obviously now he's back at his boyhood club, Santos, which is a lovely story, having again gone to the Middle East and with injuries and other things kind of failed to really deliver in his career, even though he's still fairly young, could well be playing, in European elite football. He's kind of gone off the radar somewhat. So yeah, certainly a Barcelona legend with myriad domestic titles and also Brazil's record goal scorer with 79 goals and 128 caps. So two careers that were at a very similar point in 2010, but do go in fundamentally opposite directions in the real world. So let's see how it played out for them in the game. So again, like the goat on goat, let's see how these guys get on. So let's look at Freddie Adu first. Spends his career in France with Montpellier after moving from Benfica in 2011. In the second one, spends his career in England, first signing with Wolves. From Portsmouth, spends 11 seasons in Pompey before signing for Bristol City. And then finally spends his career in England with Wolves, signing from Benfica in 2012. So very similar, really, in terms of career trajectories. Doesn't spend very long at Benfica, moves within a year or two. Then, as I said, they're very loyal, but never reaches the top. So again, total contrast, really, to Freddie Adu's actual career. Very, very loyal, not a journeyman in the slightest. Spends the majority of his career over this period at one or two clubs. But he doesn't reach the top. I mean, he's playing for Montpellier, he's playing for Wolves. Two of the three playthroughs he actually ends up playing for Wolves. So he's certainly playing at a good level, but far from elite. In none of these playthroughs did Montpellier or Wolves establish themselves as a sort of elite team, be that domestically or internationally. So certainly a very solid and much loved player, no doubt, but not elite. Very different for Neymar, but some similar themes. So in the first playthrough, we've got a bit of a journeyman here who signs for Sao Paulo before spending time at San Lorenzo, Manchester City, Hamburg, and Liverpool. So a bit of a journeyman there to begin with for Neymar, with some time in South America before spending some time with a few clubs across Europe. Number two, spends most of his career in England with Newcastle United after signing Santos in 2012, so an early-ish move there to the Premier League. And in the third one, remains at Santos for his entire career. That was an interesting one. And again, yeah, three very different trajectories in contrast, really, to Freddie Adu. But again, very loyal, but never reaches the top. I mean, in the first playthrough, yeah, we're talking a bit more of a journeyman career, but in the other two, very loyal, particularly in that third playthrough where he's at Santos for his entire career, but again doesn't reach the top. I mean, in that first playthrough, he has stints at Manchester City and Liverpool, but really doesn't break into any elite teams and sort of establish himself as an elite player. So two players that have, in contrast to the real world, in the digital space, they have quite similar careers in that they are very loyal. They do spend a bulk of their time at one or two clubs, but they really do not reach elite levels. We don't see them signing for the Real Madrids, the Barcelonas of the game. So yeah, interesting. Stark contrast between the real world output and the in-game output and the trajectories of their careers. Let's get into those numbers now. Obviously, comparing the real world Freddie Adu and Neymar is pretty unfair. As we said, Freddie Adu, a poster child for what could have been. IRL, yeah, what we're talking about. So we've got the international performance there. Goals per game, 1.33 to 6.38 assists, and then goal involvement, so just goals plus assists. Neymar outdoing Freddie Adu by some distance. Looking at the game performance, though, I mean, there's some interesting things to point out here. Number one, Freddie Adu, like I said, he's in there as an FLC, and the game, it's interesting how the computer kind of uses players based on that basic position attribute. Very much a winger, Freddie Adu, but not a goal-scoring winger. I mean, both domestically and internationally, very few goals, very few goals, 16 in 144 caps at international level for Freddie Adu. And the goals per game, yes, 0.098. How assists are modelled as well, there aren't so many assists in the game from the computer at least. So certainly down. So he's a winger, but unfortunately in game that does mean he's not producing goals or assists a lot of the time because simply how the game simulates, and yeah, it doesn't do a great job of actually representing that, but it's still a decent enough indicator because we are comparing like for like. Neymar is an FC, so that's a player that is far more likely to be put up front in a goal scoring position, and he does do better. His goal per game is at 0.38. His assist is slightly better at 0.036. So in terms of goal involvements, Neymar is doing better than Adu by about, 3, 4, by a factor of sort of 3 or 4. But I have put in the middle that there's no clear winner here. There's no clear winner here. If you look at the rating, you've got Neymar at 6.57 to Freddie Adu's 6.36. I mean, that tells you that over the course of his career in this period, this 15-year period, you've got to give it to Neymar. Neymar is the better overall player. He has the better goals per game. He has the better assists. He has the overall better goals involvement. But it's nowhere near as good, obviously, as the real world Neymar. But it's a decent enough stab, basically saying that Neymar is the better talent than Freddie Adu. But why I would say we're going to call it honours even is in that international caps. Neymar, for all that he doesn't reach the elite level, and he barely turns out for Brazil. He averages 20 caps and 12 goals. For Freddie Adu, so he's just something of a mid-range player, really. Like both domestically and internationally, Neymar in this game, even though he does show signs of being of good quality, he doesn't really establish himself as elite. He's a good player, not a great player. Freddie Adu is similarly a good player, but what I think puts Freddie Adu perhaps slightly ahead is that it's a very significant international career. Like he is a record winning international performer for the United States, 144 caps, 16 goals, lots of international titles there in the Gold Cup, etc. So in that respect, I think Freddie Adu in this world does have a slightly more prominent reputation than Neymar, even though the numbers point to Neymar being objectively the better player. So hence why kind of calling it a draw in this respect. And unfortunately, I'm kind of giving this simulation a C because in a way it does both players dirty. I mean, like I say, for Neymar, the numbers point to him being a good player, but just nowhere near as good as he ends up being in real life. For Freddie Adu, it's the flip. He's a good player, but a lot better, really, in game than he proves in real life. So in a way, both players are done dirty by their simulation. And I think there are obviously factors within that. Obviously, when they're creating this database, they're trying to judge, initial, starting quality and potential, huge, a huge number of random factors that then go into how that plays out. But ultimately, in terms of career trajectories, both are pretty wrong in terms of how Championship Manager 2010 does it. So overall, folks, looking at the Liga, I'm giving it a B, a down the middle B. I think in terms of teams and how Spanish teams perform, we're pretty good. It's an accurate representation of Barcelona and Real Madrid's dominance. It's not a difficult thing to have foreseen, but it's quite accurately represented nonetheless. You also have Atletico Madrid and Sevilla as kind of like the third Spanish teams, which again is a decent representation of how it played out over this period for those teams. But what we certainly do see is on the individual level, on the individual player basis, the Championship Manager 2010 does get things quite wrong in terms of player trajectory. Totally understandable. You're not going to be able to predict an individual's performance to such accuracy. But, in the Messi and Ronaldo, we didn't see the longevity, we didn't see the high quality from Ronaldo coming through as strongly. And then we look at Neymar, when we look at Neymar and Freddie Adu, the two players have very contrasting career trajectories to how things played out in the real world. So yeah, certainly good simulation in terms of team performance, perhaps more erratic simulations in terms of individuals. So yeah, solid, not spectacular. It's a B for La Liga. Next time we're going on to the Premier League, I hope to see you there.